Well, when this scandal first broke, the industry liked to portray it as being a few rogue engineers. But what we now know is this was systematic fraud, authorised at the highest level, and one which was being perpetrated not just by Volkswagen, but by almost every car manufacturing company. Put very simply, what the companies were doing is detecting when the car was being tested and making sure that the exhaust treatment systems that controls the level of pollution worked well when the car was in the laboratory being tested, but was switched off or switched down most of the time that the car was driven on the road. They did this in various ways. Some used temperature controls, so the exhaust treatment systems didn't work below 17 degrees. For some, it was when the car was accelerating or travelling at high speed or loaded. The testing regime has been improved enormously since the Dieselgate scandal. We now have real-world tests for nitrous oxide and particle numbers. We have a new laboratory test for CO2 emissions and for fuel economy. We also have better systems and checks and balances in the system following the evidence that simply the approval system was not fit for purpose. But fundamentally, the biggest problem is that the car industry still tries to circumvent the rules at every possible opportunity. And the regulatory system isn't strong enough and robust enough to actually prevent them from doing that. What we really need is a culture change in this industry, so they actually accept environmental regulations, meet them in a reasonable way, and that those requirements are enforced by the regulators. And we're still in a situation where time and time again we are exposing new scandals, just as we've done recently on the new CO2 tests. I think we have to do two things. One is we have to make the penalties in Europe truly onerous. No company will consider cheating like this in the US again, because they know that they will be hit by massive penalties and fines, and senior people within the organisation will go to prison. But here in Europe, Volkswagen has been required to upgrade some of its models, but none of the other companies have been required to do anything. And on top of that, no company has, apart from Volkswagen, has been fined, and nobody's gone to prison. I think if senior people were held accountable for the decisions that they take, then they would make different decisions. This is a huge problem and an enormous legacy. We estimate there are now 44 million dirty diesel cars on Europe's roads that are producing more than 3 times the legal limits of nitrogen oxide pollution. So there's 3 things that we really need to do. The first is we have to get those cars cleaned up. So software upgrades could be part of the solution. Some of them probably need more extensive hardware fixes. The second thing we'd like to see is the car industry actually paying into a fund to clean up city air. If they contributed €10 for every new car which was being sold, that would raise €150 million a year that could then be used by cities to actually bring in air pollution control measures. They could replace older buses, they could plant trees to capture the pollution, they could take local measures. So the car industry needs to pay for the legacy of the toxic air that they've created. And the third thing they need to do is they actually need to use some of that money for genuine independent testing, so that organisations like Transport and Environment and cities can actually go out and test cars and make sure that they really are achieving the limits. Well, the most important thing cities can do is actually to start to get the dirty cars out of city centres. So they need to introduce low emission zones, they need to introduce zero emission areas into their city centres to actually get the dirty cars out. And we can do that much more effectively than we could in the past, because now there are databases which actually tell us about how these cars are really performing on the road. Through a project known as TRUE, that Transport and Environment has been running with the ICCT and the FIA Foundation, we've measured over 1 million cars on the road and measured their instantaneous levels of pollution. So we can now look back and say, over the last 10 years, these are the cars which are clean and these are the cars which are dirty, which you should be banning. You can't anymore assume that new cars are clean, because some are, and regrettably many still aren't. Well, I think the most important thing is that there's going to be a shift towards electromobility. Electric cars are coming very quickly, the costs of batteries are declining very fast, and penetration of renewables in the grid is rising very rapidly. So electric vehicles are going to be a big part of solving both our air pollution and our climate problems in the next decade. But what we also have to understand is that there are other revolutions underway. So we will also see a shift to autonomous vehicles. And if we're not careful, those autonomous vehicles will be driven much more. For example, we may well see that there are, rather than lots of one-person cars sitting in traffic jams, there are actually lots of no-people cars sitting in traffic jams in the future, or driving around our city centres, avoiding parking charges or running errands. So cities are going to need to make sure that as electric and autonomous vehicles are introduced, they're also shared. So we make sure that we are shifting to shared electric and autonomous vehicles. We need to upgrade our public transport systems to take account of these new technologies in order to bring down the costs of public transport and improve their efficiency. There's a great deal that cities can be doing, for example, through encouraging mobility as a service, which is another digital technology which is emerging. But too often, I think at the moment, some cities choose to put barriers in the way of new technology rather than really embracing the opportunities which are available to them. They try to protect the incumbent transport operators rather than open up the market to genuine competition which will deliver better service for customers and citizens overall. So we need to make sure that in the future more and more our mobility is shared, not privately owned, and that we embrace these new digital and electric technologies to really make our cities move and move clean.